COVID restrictions. Members of the public may participate by following the instructions listed on the agenda. Following roll call during our summary of hearing procedure, we will review how the public may provide comment during today's session. Our roll call: Commissioner Royer.
Present.
Commissioner Nessel.
Commissioner Nessel is present and accounted for.
Okay, good. Commissioner Arnold.
Commissioner Arnold present.
Vice Chair Rainsford.
Present.
And Chair Boehm, I am present. The procedure for this hearing is as follows. After the staff report, applicants and appellants may make a 5-minute presentation. In the event that additional time is taken during the presentation, it will reduce the 5 minutes given during closing remarks. If you are watching YouTube or cable TV and would like to speak during public hearing, planning referrals, or general business, please go over to the meeting on Zoom and you will find the link on the agenda, or you can call 408-535-3505. If you wish to speak on an item, just use your raise hand on Zoom or press *9 on your phone. City staff will call out names of the public identified in the items that they want to speak on. You may identify yourself by the raised hand feature on Zoom or the *9 on your phone. As your name is called, please unmute your device. Phone-in callers, please press *6 to unmute. After we confirm your audio is working, your allotted time will begin. Each speaker will have 2 minutes. Speakers using a translator will have 4 minutes. After public testimony, the applicant and appellant may make closing remarks for an additional 5 minutes. Historic Landmarks commissioners may ask questions of the speakers. Response to the commissioner questions will not reduce the speaker's time allowance. Staff will unmute the speaker to respond to the commissioner. The public hearing will then be closed and the Historic Landmarks Commission will take action on the item. The Historic Landmarks Commission may request staff to respond to the public testimony, ask staff questions, and discuss the item. If a commissioner would like to discuss a topic to be addressed under the good and welfare items, please contact planning staff in advance of the commission meeting. All public records relating to an open session item on this agenda, which are not exempt from disclosure pursuant to the California Public Records Act, that are distributed to a majority of the legislative body will be available for the public by emailing planning support staff at San Jose, California.gov. At the same time that the public records are distributed or made available to the legislative body. Before we begin, I want to remind the Historic Landmarks Commission members and the members of the public to follow our code of conduct at all times. This includes commenting on the specific agenda item only and addressing the full body. Public speakers will not engage in a conversation with the commissioners or staff. All members of the Historic Landmarks Commission, staff, and public are expected to refrain from abusive language. Repeated failure to comply with the code of conduct which will disturb, disrupt, or impede the orderly conduct of this meeting may result in removal from the meeting. This meeting of the Historic Landmarks Commission will now come to order. Our first item is deferrals. And there are no items for deferrals. Our next item on the agenda is consent calendar. And there will be a separate discussion of individual consent calendar items as they are considered to be routine and will be adopted by one motion. If a member of the commission requests debate, separate vote, or recusal on a particular item, that item may be removed from the consent calendar by the chair and considered separately. The public may comment on the entire consent calendar and any items removed from the consent calendar by the chair. There are no items for the consent calendar. Public hearings is item 3. Generally, public hearings items are considered by the Historic Landmarks Commission in the order in which they appear on the agenda. However, be advised that the commission may take items out of order to facilitate the agenda, such as to accommodate significant public testimony, or may defer discussion of items to later agendas for public hearing time management purposes. There are no items under public hearings. And number 4 is planning referrals. There are no items for that. So we come to item number 5 on the agenda, which is general business. And our first item is A, additions to the historic resources inventory. And to introduce this and explain more about it, I turn to our project manager, historic preservation officer, Dana Peak Edwards.
Thank you, Chair Boehm. Before you tonight are 16 properties proposed for listing in the Historic Resources Inventory as identified structures and 1 contributing structure. The proposed properties came out of the 2021 Historic Context Statement Update process, which had a stated purpose of connecting previously unidentified and unrecognized resources and patterns in the existing built environment with their importance and significance so they could be properly considered within the city's development review process. Working with historical consultant Archives and Architecture, the Planning Division collected input from members of the diverse communities that make up San Jose. An online web portal, which is now closed and transferred, allowed the public to suggest properties and places to be potentially added to the Historic Resources Inventory. These suggestions are discussed in the Historic Resources Working List webpage, which was included, the links included in the staff report. Included in the staff report is a table that summarizes the potential significance of the properties proposed for inclusion in the Historic Resources Inventory as identified structures and contributing structures. The properties would be flagged for future documentation and evaluation by a qualified historic resources consultant. One property, 651 North 6th Street, which is the Prayer Garden Church of God in Christ, was recorded in a DPR form prepared in 2004 by Carrying Company as part of the San Jose Japantown Historic Context and Reconnaissance Survey, which evaluated the area as a potential historic district. The survey identified the building as a contributing structure. The other properties are proposed to be listed as identified structures, which potential historic significance aligning with the adopted 2017 City Council Historic Survey Strategy, which directed staff to proactively identify historic resources and to update the historic resource inventory to allow the city to preserve more historic structures. One request was received by the Kellogg Company to defer listing of APN 249-64028 on Ego Way. Gordon Paulson with Kellogg Company is present tonight if you have any questions. Staff recommends accepting the request and deferring action on this one property to a date certain on June 1st, 2022. This concludes staff presentation, and staff is available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dana. So our first people to make questions would be the commissioners. I'll go through the commissioners. Commissioner Royer, do you have any questions? Or
No questions.
okay, Commissioner Arnold,
Commissioner Arnold, no questions.
Commissioner Nessel.
I have a question, and it was really prompted by the action taken by the Kellogg people. There's quite a list of properties on this list, and I'm wondering what happens if the owner of that property does not want to be on the HRI. Is that an option, or does the city get to say?
Well, I just want to give you some background. I spoke with the public relations officer with Kellogg on Friday, and the request for deferral is not due to opposition as we know at this time. The request is because it's a very large company, and when a notice like this is received, it circulates around to different hands to figure out who's the one in a large company to deal with it. So by the time the request fell into the hands of the attorneys, it was a little bit late for them to do any research to review it. Really, it's in the company's best interest to be listed because it's a commercial property, which will, if they want to demolish the building or substantially alter the building, will require historic review. And this way, and documentation. So this way, the property is already flagged and there won't be any surprises when, if an EIR comes up or other environmental process, historic documentation is required, then, we're already noticed and flagged to understand the process with all parties. But in terms of, do they have a say? I don't think it behooves Kellogg to not be on there, but certainly it's up to the commission and also staff to list the property. So it would be up to the listing bodies.
Sorry to interrupt. My name is Gordon Paulson, and I was the one that submitted the request. If the
Hey, Mr. Paulson.
is it, I'm not keep my okay.
Excuse me, is Mr. Paulson. This is the chair. I'm going to be asking you for your comment in just a bit. So if you don't mind, could you wait until the public is asked to contribute? Commissioner Nessel, do you have any other questions?
Well, there's a lot of properties, and some are just homes, some are businesses, some are, it's a variety of places. And I'm concerned that by placing them on this list, we're restricting the rights of these property owners to do things, whether it be sell their property or renovate it or, anything like that. So that is my concern, but because putting it on the list is really step one in what could be a multi-step process. And so if it's just the city just saying, oh yeah, we think that's historic, or then I think there needs to be some more communication between the property owner and the city before we just arbitrarily say and create a mandate. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment. I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to respond, or shall we go on? Dana?
I guess I'd just like to respond that, it's not the planning department kind of going off on a tangent. This is a council directive. Council, wants to identify these properties so that property owners know that there's potential significance. And it's in everyone's best interest to have these identified in advance so they're not coming up at the last minute if anything's proposed.
The other thing that I'll just add is that being identified as an identified structure on the historic resources inventory is, as you indicated, Commissioner Nessel, it's actually the first step. And yet for each of those additional steps, if it were going to be granted landmark status, it would require much more input from the homeowner or the building owner, as well as ultimately the city council taking action. So I think if your concern is for the homeowner, that this is a minimal type of protection, and it's really a designation, and I appreciate our historic preservation officer's explanation. I just wanted to add that a little bit. All right, our next commissioner to ask a question, if he has one, is Vice Chair Rainsford.
Oh yeah, thank you. I'll just second what you just said there, and I don't think that putting these on the list is an imposition on the property owners. I've been on this commission long enough to see plenty of identified structures being demolished. So, it's hardly any kind of, it's not much of an obstruction to what actually happens, but it is a way for the public and for us to be aware of what's out there, and for then perhaps a next step to be taken. I was very glad to see some of these buildings put on the list, particularly the ones that are a little bit vulnerable, close to City Hall. So that's the Roberts House and the Good Brothers House. I think they're both very important buildings, not only for the social context, but also for the architecture itself. I do have a question about some of these buildings, just because in some cases it seems clear what is being proposed as historic, but some cases not. I mean, in the case of the Kellogg's building, all we see is a little entrance. And I have no information about the rest of the building. I think it's a huge building. I don't think it's visible from the street. I don't know what preserving it or not preserving it would do. So I guess I realize that we're going to have more information about it. So I do have some questions about some of these, but overall, I think it's a good idea.
Thank you for your comment. Does being identified as an identified structure on the historic resource inventory, does that generate an additional evaluation or not at the present time?
No, not at the present time.
Okay.
As I explained to the government liaison, it may turn out that this property is not important. I think at this point, it's the only thing we know of with regard to the Eggo waffle history. We don't know whether the factory that they were originally produced in before Kellogg took it over is still around. We don't know where it is. We don't know the basement where the brothers identified the powdered formula. So we just don't have enough information to really know whether it's the only thing kind of left that's related to this history. So that would all get documented by a qualified historic resources consultant. I'm sure that Mr. Paulson, will identify whether there's any plans for the factory, but if it were proposed for demolition, it's something that would be documented and evaluated regardless of it being on the inventory. So this just kind of gives a little heads up that it's flagged as something that, we will be looking into its history.
Okay, thank you very much, Historic Preservation Officer Peak Edwards. I do not have any questions. I just simply wanted to thank the work of the staff in getting this to this point. And I realize it's been an ongoing effort and preceded Ms. Peak Edwards's work, but I think she's done some great job, some work here too, and want to thank you very much for your help on this, Dana, and getting it to our attention. So with that, now we'll turn to the public and
Commissioner Boehm, I had
Yeah.
my hand up.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I skipped you. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. After I listened to the discussion, I have a question to Dana. Oh, another hand just went up. Tell me about 651 North 6, and that's Prayer Garden. I'm trying to understand. They're a contributing structure, and they were included with Japantown. That's where I was getting a little confused.
Yeah, back in the early 2000s, there was an effort to designate Japantown as a historic district. So there was quite a bit of documentation done. The historic context, I believe, is on the citywide historic context statements page. And there were quite a few properties that were documented. I don't know that they were really thoroughly documented as individual resources. So all we really know at this point is that, it's a contributing structure to a potential district, but it would need, again, individual evaluation for its significance, as a candidate city landmark potentially. And I meant to include the DPR form that was done in 2004. And I guess somehow in trying to add all these properties, I inadvertently left it off. So I can provide that information at a later date.
Okay, thank you. I just needed clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Arnold. Once again, I apologize for going over you. I appreciate your question. It was great, good question. All right, and I see that Commissioner Nessel has another question.
Let me make sure I'm unmuted. Yes, my question has to do with if we do somehow declare or identify these properties, are there plans to put some type of indication on those properties as to their historical significance? For example, the Kellogg's plant or the Stevens Creek Toyota plant. I mean, why is that being designated? Because I think we need to explain to the public why these things are important. And just by putting them on the registry, I think it's only a half step, that we need to somehow put a plaque or some kind of signage at these locations indicating the historical significance of this property. Thank you.
Gotcha. So right now, the plaques are reserved for city landmarks. We don't have a general plaque program for inventory properties. And really, the point of the inventory and the reason why it's tied to the planning department, is its primary function is related to development proposals and flagging, for staff what permitting process or not is required. That's the main function for the inventory. There's, other aspects to it in terms of education, and those types of things, enhancing and promoting. But that's not the primary goal for properties that are just identified. We also have, been working for some time with the GIS department. And as you probably know, because you've looked around and taken a tour of our website, we have a historic resources inventory webpage where you can identify, the properties that are listed, they're mapped. So one of the things that we're working on with them is to place the DPR forms related to these properties and tie them to their spot on the GIS map so that anyone can open up those DPR forms and understand, if we have any documentation on them, why they're significant and what criteria they might meet. But for these ones where they're being flagged and identified as something that need documentation, we wouldn't have the information to make that available at this point.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Just a
Okay,
quick
and I
comment.
don't know if maybe you know this, Commissioner Nessel, but I think there are over 700 different properties on the Historic Resource Index. I may be incorrect, but it's a large number, and compared to the number of those properties that are landmark.
We have more than 4,000 on the inventory.
4,000.
4,000, thank you. So is it 700 that are landmarks?
I don't think we have that many. I think it's
Oh.
more 200 or 300, but
2 or 3.
yeah.
All right. Where did I get 700? We shall go on. City Attorney Renee Ortega, you have a question?
Yes, just a little comment on terminology. So this is an inventory. So a registry typically refers to, for example, the California Register of Historical Resources or the National Register of Historical Resources. This is not that. I mean, this is essentially a list flagging properties for potentially further study or not. They're just on a list.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. And now we will turn to the public for questions, and I see 2 hands raised, and I will ask Yen to indicate who is going to be speaking first. Yen?
Jennifer.
Gordon has the floor.
I think it said Gordon has the floor. I think that's me. I'm Gordon Paulson, and I'm corporate counsel for Kellogg Company. First, let me apologize for interrupting beforehand. I'm not used to Zoom meetings of this type, so I apologize. Was not trying to be disrespectful at all. And I appreciate the context. And we literally just got this stuff last week. And as a food company, we are singularly focused on one thing, and that's safety. And it's the safety of our people, the people who eat our food, our employees, and the people who work in our plant, and the safety of the people around our plant. And so we just want to make sure, and we're requesting a deferral to next month to get a better understanding. And I think, as everyone has mentioned here, hey, it's just being put on a list. It's not going to restrict your ability to make sure that we can comply with making sure that we're keeping people safe and healthy, along with making sure we comply with all of our regulatory requirements. So that's our request, is to defer the consideration of placing 475 Ego Way on the list now, and we would like to have that discussed at the June 1st meeting.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Paulson.
Thank you.
Yes. Why don't we have Yen call out the next speaker?
Ben, you are unmuted.
Thank you. Ben Leach, Preservation Action Council of San Jose. Want to say it's always very exciting and encouraging when things are added to the historic resources inventory. As you all know, the HRI is absolutely a work in progress. Even though there are 4,000 things on there, there are many more that have yet to be identified. And I think that the recommendations tonight came out of the Survey San Jose public outreach effort, which I think was highly successful as a proof of concept. A call to the general public and interested parties to identify sites, structures that have been underappreciated, whether it's because it's a particular building type or in a particular neighborhood that has not yet been surveyed. So I think that the diversity of the things being added tonight is indicative of not only how much more work we need to do, but also the educational, as we've been talking about, that it really is an educational tool to make people aware of what's out there. And so I am very excited that this could potentially be the first of many additions that are coming out of both, expert surveys and also just public engagement. I think that as we know that the Survey San Jose effort was somewhat abbreviated. I think that it should be an ongoing thing. And I think that this is, again, a proof of concept of how much we can get done if we just continue to leave the door open for people to suggest things. And again, it goes on a list. It's not, it doesn't prevent development. It is a early warning system so that we all know what's out there. And again, hope that it's the first of many.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Leach. Our next speaker will be called out by Yen.
Mike, you are unmuted.
I believe he said Mike Sodergren.
Mike, are you there? Well, maybe we can go on to Lynn Stevenson for a moment.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes,
Yen?
I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, hi. Yes, like Mr. Leach, Lynn Stevenson from the Preservation Action Council. Like Ben Leach, I totally support the addition of these items to the inventory for all the reasons he stated. But as a lawyer, I really like to see things added because this gives people notice, which Dana had brought up, that these properties potentially, have some historic significance, that there may be issues if they try to develop them or demolish them or whatever. And I think that that's really one of the goals that council is trying to accomplish, is to give people notice, or a developer, when they're looking at a property, that there potentially are historic issues with the property. Because otherwise these developers buy these properties, they spend tons of money, doing plans, submitting stuff, and then they find out that PAC or whoever, oppose the demolition or the modification of the property, and then it's just all a big brouhaha. So I think adding anything that we can that should be added is just a great idea, even if it's for this issue alone. So I'm in support of adding all of these properties. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Our next, well, let me ask, Yen, would you like to call out the name of the next person? Well, it's actually Mike.
Mike, you're unmuted if you want to try again.
Yen or Jennifer or Danielle, you might try putting him into the panelist section for a minute and just see if that helps.
Are you there, Mike?
Yes, I am here. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. The system crashed a couple times. Hey, I just want to say thank you as a follow-up to the other comments that were made. The cultural diversity of these additions is fantastic to see. And I just wanted to pick out one to make a comment about. I think most of you who've heard me comment as a citizen and also as a member of the Preservation Action Council know that I've made the statement many times that these buildings are the backdrop for telling our stories. And I just want to pick out one to talk about, which is the College Park Station near Belleville and the Caltrain and Union Pacific Station, and the comments that were in the Archives and Architecture write-up. It was constructed, when it was constructed, and that the site was most famous for its mention in the first scene of Call of the Wild, written by Jack London in 1903. The other thing that I've said on a number of occasions is that there's cross connections between these properties, and the cross connection that caught my mind, caught my attention, was the Remillard House and Lillian Remillard, who actually taught French to Jack London. And there was actually rumors of romantic involvement between them. But, I just think it's interesting that that particular location was specifically referenced, the connection to Jack London. And then, of course, my knowledge and awareness of Lillian Remillard's connection to Jack London and the property and the brickmaking industry that she led as a woman in the turn of the century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Soderman. All right, we are at that point. If you have any further comments, commissioners, I would like to take those comments before we take the staff recommendation to add those properties to the historic resources inventory. I'll go back over the list to see if you have a comment to make. Commissioner Royer, do you have a comment?
I just have a procedural question. Are we able to decouple the one property and move forward with the rest? I see Dana shaking.
Yes,
nodding her
you
head.
can alter the staff recommendation.
Okay,
Okay.
that's all I have then.
Commissioner Arnold,
Commissioner Arnold, no comments.
Commissioner Nessel,
I'm wondering what Mike Sonegren has to say about the property at 1602 San Antonio, East San Antonio. I think. Anything?
Well,
Or-
let's, if Mike wants to respond, I think that's appropriate here. Question was whether you have a reaction to the property being listed or suggested to be listed on East San Antonio.
Yeah, that's the Mayfair West grocery store, right?
Mayfair West. I don't know it as that, but it was a food market.
Yeah, what was the nature of the question?
If you have a reaction to that being added to this list.
Yeah, I went through all of these lists and I was just very happy to see that there was, this is a representation of, a local market, but also of a people group that is often overlooked in our preservation efforts. I don't think it's systematic necessarily, but somehow, this just seems to be a very bright star. When we look at the concentration of structures that are identified as potentially eligible for landmarks, we tend not to see stuff on the east side, right? We tend not to see stuff in areas that represent sort of our Latino culture and other cultural groups. And so I'm always really excited when there's something that provides that stage or that platform for the stories that are inevitably tied to those locations as possible. So thank you, Commissioner Nessel, for asking that question.
Thank you, Mike, for your response. Any further comments, Commissioner Nessel?
No, thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
Vice Chair Rainsford, do you have any comments before we?
No further comments.
Okay, and I do not either. So I think what we can do is to entertain a motion. Is that correct? Is that the correct procedure here? Let me ask City
Yes.
Attorney. Okay, so we are going to entertain a motion, and the motion seems to me would include both the adding the properties to the historic resource inventory, as well as the deferral of the property on Ego Way. So if I would receive a motion for that, if you would be so inclined to make one.
So move.
Okay, and
Second.
so let me repeat that motion. I wasn't very, I didn't word it very carefully. So we are suggesting the addition to the properties listed on page 5 of the agenda, including A through O, except letter M, to be added to the historic resource inventory as identified structures. And in the case of letter M, which is on Ego Way, that be proper to be deferred until June, our next June meeting. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay.
Nessel seconds.
All right. Any discussion before we vote? I would just offer to anyone who would like to speak up on the commission. There is no discussion, so we're going to vote, starting with Commissioner Arnold.
Commissioner Arnold, I vote yes.
Commissioner Nessel,
Nessel votes yes.
Commissioner Royer,
Commissioner Royer, I approve.
and Vice Chair Rainsford,
Vice Chair Rainsford, I approve.
and Chair Boehm wholeheartedly approves, and with great appreciation. And so the properties listed on page 5 of the agenda, numbers A through O, with the exception of M, will be added to our historic resources inventory. And letter M is going to be deferred until the June HLC meeting. Thank you very much. Our next item on the agenda is the Historic Landmarks Commission 2022 Annual Work Plan Goals, which is item 5B. And we have a
Can-
few things.
Chair
to
Bain,
talk-
before we move on, do we also need to vote on the one property that was identified
Oh, yes.
as contributing?
You are correct. Thank
That
you.
wasn't included in your motion, I don't think.
Thank you, Commissioner Royer. So again, I would entertain a motion to add the property on 651 North 6th Street as a contributing structure to our historic resources inventory.
So moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
Commissioner Arnold, I second.
Commissioner Arnold second, Commissioner Royer moved. And now is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we're going to go forward with the vote. Commissioner Nessel
Nessel approved.
and Commissioner Arnold,
Commissioner Arnold, I approve.
Commissioner Royer,
Commissioner Royer, I approve.
and Vice Chair Rainsford.
Vice Chair Rainsford, I approve.
Chair Boehm, I do approve. So there is a 5-0 vote to approve that the structure at 651 North 6th Street be added to the historic resources inventory as a contributing structure. Now we can go to item 5B, and that is the work plan goals. And we have a few things that we're going to talk about here tonight. And the first one has to do with financial incentives for historic preservation. Commissioner Royer, were you able to do any further research and identify any maybe local or not local cities that have some kind of financial incentive to preserve their historic structures?
I did some research and I was not able to find a good example or any good examples to bring forward that have, a preservation fund that's created by some kind of fee structure. So I will continue to look for that. I believe I brought up at a previous meeting a facade program that I helped author. So I do have that I can email around. I'm happy to put it up on the screen, but it just gives a little bit more information. It was back in 2006, 2007, as part of a newly created Main Street, National Trust Main Street entity in Wilmington, Delaware. And so as part of that newly formed organization and an interest to revitalize some underutilized storefronts and reactivate the pedestrian way there, we created this program. So I'm happy to share that if anybody wants to look at it now, or I can just email it around.
Well, I have a question for perhaps Dana and perhaps Renee, I'm not sure. Is it possible for an item to be shared at a meeting here tonight that hasn't been pre-programmed?
I think, I mean, if it falls within your area of research, Commissioner Royer, so I think it's a generalized placeholder for information.
Okay. Commissioner Royer, is this a one-page document or several pages?
It's several pages, so I can just flip through quickly if people are interested, or I'm happy to send it to Dana and she can distribute it out if that's more efficient.
So are you offering to give us some of the major provisions of it now?
Sure. Yep.
Okay, why don't you do that?
Okay. And I apologize, the font for some reason looks a little bit strange, but again, this was a facade improvement program, and it evolved to also include renovation of upstairs units. When I started working in downtown Wilmington, a lot of the upper floors had been just closed off in an effort to secure buildings. There were a lot of roll down gates, blocked off storefronts, and blocked off upper units. So our program was really a way to try to revitalize the community by removing barriers to these buildings. So reactivating the upper floors to get more residential unit uses or upper story offices, and also to create a more welcoming pedestrian experience by removing some of these roll down gates and improving facades. So there were some financial partners, and the idea was a matching grant. So it's very clearly laid out, the process, the terms, and then just sort of giving some visual examples to help. They're small grants, so this is not intended for large scale development. It's really meant to help small business owners improve a facade, even if they're a tenant. If they were given permission by the landlord, they could use some funds to take a building that looked like this, remove the roll down gate, reactivate the sign band, and improve this building in particular. It was just sealed off. The upper 2 floors weren't even accessible anymore. They had closed off the stair opening. So we were able to help remove the roll down gate, take down some of that additional stucco that made the opening improportionate, and then activate the upper floors. And this is the end result. So there's a lot of visual information again, and there's just some information about program boundaries, a very clear process, requirements, sample application materials, what's required for the funding, and then just some design guidelines.
So can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
I noticed there $10,000. Is that the maximum grant?
That was the maximum matching grant. Yep. So, well, if it was a corner property, like say this one, if there was this was a larger development project, but if this storefront has 2 facades that are publicly visible, so that storefront would have been eligible for a $20,000 matching grant. So again, just some before and afters, some guidance to general architecture, preservation, and then just some more resources, before and after shots,
Okay.
recommendations for awnings, signage, lighting, and then there's a separate interior fit out program that, again, was the purpose of that was to reactivate some upper floors and just get more eyes on the street. So you had these 3 or 4-story buildings that had no activation on the upper floors. So it really just didn't make the main, this is the main street. If you walk up Market Street in Wilmington, Delaware, you're walking from the river and the train station, Amtrak train station, right to the center of town, Rodney Square. So it was a very successful program. It's still in use today. I'm happy to find out. I wrote to my former colleague there and asked if she could send me that old document that we put together, and she sent me the updated version because they're still using it. So I'm happy to hear that there's still participation in that.
Thank you for sharing the major points of the program. I'll ask each of the commissioners if they have any questions of it, and you can respond if you'd like. So I'll ask Commissioner Arnold, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions, but it was really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry to flip through it so quickly. It's a large document, but again, I can email that to Dana and she can distribute it to everybody.
Commissioner Nessel, do you have any questions?
Not questions, but observation. It looks like a great thing was accomplished here in terms of downtown redevelopment. And I'm wondering where the money came from, because what you showed was not inexpensive. And how did it get funded?
There were a variety of sources. So as you probably know, there's a large banking industry in Wilmington, Delaware. So there were some contributions from banks and local businesses, some funding from the National Trust, and from Central Business Development grants.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then, let's see, we have Commissioner, sorry, Vice Chair Rainsford, do you have any questions?
No, just a comment. I think that's looks like a great program. I think it would be very appropriate for the downtown historic district, where I think we have the most similar kinds of buildings to Wilmington. It might be interesting to think about also how to address bigger problems. So there was a fire on, I think it was about 71 East San Fernando Street. And there's a kind of a stabilized facade, which is there. You know, if there's some way of thinking about facades like that, like what can happen right there. And I don't know, because it doesn't really fall in, because this is kind of a small scale program, but this would be a huge thing to do. So that's my only comment.
Okay. Likewise, I am very much in favor of this program. And I think that we need to look at different funding sources. And, you know, a lot of it, like you said, Commissioner Royer, this was a matching program. So it sounds like the owner of the property had to pay the same amount of money that they were being granted.
That's right.
Yeah, so that would be incentivizing, I would think, and extremely effective for the amount of money that was being offered. So please do send that out. And I wonder what action might be taken, because we will be coming up on the last meeting of this commission year before we take a break in the summer. So would it be appropriate to ask for some further delineation for a language that might be approved by the city council? Is that something we're looking for, or is this simply a private, totally private enterprise that would have to be taken up by some other, perhaps PAC San Jose or another different agency?
Yeah, in Wilmington, it was a run by the local bid. It was a partnership between the local business improvement district, who was also partnered with Main Street Wilmington. So it was, you know, purely a run on the not-for-profit side. There was no city involvement in the program, other than, you know, helping us create the process and help explain the permitting process to the grant recipients and sort of streamline that process and education.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to point out something that I found in Envision San Jose that is germane to this topic of discussion. And that is in chapter 6, there's a objective or a goal, I would think, there are two of them that are appropriate for this discussion. LU 1313, which is to foster the rehabilitation of buildings, structures, areas, places, and districts of historic significance. Utilizes incentives permitting flexibility as to their uses, transfer of development rights, tax relief for designated landmarks and districts, easements, alternative building code provisions for the reuse of historic structures, and financial incentives. And LU 1318 states, explore establishing a grant program for historic preservation, potentially partnering with the Preservation Action Council, San Jose, History San Jose, or another organization. So there you go. We do, I think it's in line with our goals as a city. And I think it's something I personally support, and I feel like there's a lot of support on the commission. So with that in mind, would you consider or drafting some kind of language to give support to this facade restoration?
Yeah, I'd be happy to work. I'm not sure exactly what form that would need to take as far as.
And City Attorney Renee Ortega, would you be willing to work with her on language for this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is this going to be some sort of ordinance or other program? I think it might be best to work with staff on the details of the program.
Okay,
I'm not sure there'd be any sort of legal issues.
okay.
Like
At some point, you may
was
be
proposed.
asked for some, your advice and your counsel.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it'll come by our office.
Yeah.
Almost everything comes by our office to just get a look at. So
Let me get feedback from Ms. Peak Edwards and see what she has, what's thinking on her end. Is this a good idea to go forward with?
It's a great idea. I just, this model is not a public model. It's a private model. So I'm not sure, how, unless staff could engage with our downtown affiliates. We have Downtown Association and, other groups to see, whether there'd be any available money. I mean, it's certainly worth discussions.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to talk with a group of folks if if you want to pull together the right people, and happy to participate in conversations, meetings, share this document out, and even help craft something locally. Like I said, I think it's been very successful in Wilmington. It's like you said, it's not a public program there, but I think the guidance of different areas that could be identified as good areas to launch this program, and if there is any funding from the city that would be able to be put into a kitty to start a grant program, just sort of thinking through those sort of things.
Yeah, and I don't even know myself whether there's already some monies, that they give to business owners, and so yes, it's definitely worth a conversation.
Okay, well, it sounds like you have at least a next step that you can go forward with. And based on the two goals that I stated, I think it is feasible to go forward with partnership with private enterprise of some point in the city. And whether we get involved in some funding, a little funding, or no funding at all, it's a great program. So I definitely am very much in support of it. Thank you, Commissioner Royer.
My pleasure.
All right. Our next item has to do with recognition of culturally diverse properties, Commissioner Arnold. And I believe the question states whether or not you would like to identify members of your committee. I believe you will be spearheading this effort. Is that a safe assumption?
Yes, but
So would you
yes.
like to identify members of your committee who, or what your ideas are in terms of naming members of your subcommittee, I should say?
I think as I gave my report, I left that blank because I hadn't given it the thought. I mean, is it 50% community? Is it 50% landmarks? I hadn't worked that through at all. To be candid, I hadn't really worked it through or thought it through. And
So would you plan to meet by Zoom?
oh yeah.
Okay. And do you have a given number of total people on the subcommittee?
Haven't thought that through. And I believe in small committees because, I'm in higher ed. We tend to have very large committees that go on for a lifetime. Okay. So perhaps a small committee. Well, let me answer your question with the question. Other than myself, would there be another commissioner that would be on this committee?
So that's a good question. And
Yeah, you can have two.
okay, so the maximum is 2, but it could conceivably just be yourself, but 2 would be the maximum, and then
Okay.
others in addition to. So let me ask each of the commissioners if they're interested to be on the subcommittee. Commissioner Arnold, I'm sorry, Commissioner Royer, are you interested in being on the subcommittee?
I think I'll have my hands full with the financial incentives.
Okay. Vice Chair Rainsford?
I think I have my hands full with the design review subcommittee.
Okay, and Commissioner Nessel?
I have to pass.
Okay, I too will have to pass. So that probably leaves you, and if you would like to, get our opinions, I would be happy to give them to you. Or if you want to simply take more time to think how many people you want to be, how often you meet, and most importantly, to me at least, is how you communicate with the HLC. Would you communicate via written report, or would you make an oral report after you meet in your subcommittee?
Don't know.
Okay, so do you want to take some time to think about it?
That would be good.
Okay,
That would be good.
very good.
Also, feel free to email me. I'm happy to brainstorm with you, Commissioner Arnold.
Thank you, Jana. In fact, we might do a Starbucks run. Is that
Sounds
okay?
like a plan, of course.
The reason that I think that's excellent. I'm concerned because this is a huge committee. That's number one. I don't want us to get bogged down on who we didn't invite. That's a concern. I've been on committees like that, okay? And in definitions, I think we begin with defining how the city defines or policy defines. I've got the goals, which I presented at our last meeting, and I've got the objectives. But this is not something where you say you're going to have 15 people. Remember, don't forget when I did my research on all of the different homeowners associations, what that looked like. Okay, so it really is something that I think that takes some discussion, some thought, some input. And I'm always concerned about who's not at the table. That's my concern. And I think a good place to begin, of course, is our inventory listings that, we heard tonight. I'm pleased to hear, as an example, that Prayer Garden was on that list. That's something I've been trying to do, behind the scenes for many years. And it is it's very pleasing. But this can be a very sensitive area. As I said, I've been on large community committees that have blown up in leader spaces. And I want to be inclusive.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to think about is I don't want the standing committee to be a hindrance for you. If it feels so, weighty, complicated, maybe it's not the right vehicle. Certainly we can be inclusive without necessarily having a committee, and we can engage the community without having a committee. So let's just talk about maybe what the best way to move some work forward, and maybe a standing committee, it can just stay there and not be activated. It was just a kind of a standing thing that could be jumped into when needed, but we don't have to use it.
So let us meet. We'll meet at Starbucks. You're all invited. And come back to you, with our, information about our discussion on how we move forward. Because as you could see, everybody is roaring. They've got lots of time on their hands to be on this committee and but the work is valuable. It's extremely valuable. Okay, so
Absolutely.
I'll send you an email, Dana, and you send me an email, and we'll come back to you. I do have it will have to be, it can't be next month. I'm going to be traveling at our next meeting, so I'm kind of putting it out there right now. Keeping my fingers crossed, but I know I'm gonna be unable to be here.
Okay, so will you, that means you cannot communicate by Zoom, is that right?
Oh yeah, no, I will. I said for our next HLC meeting, I will be communicating, but I will be talking with Dana sooner than you might imagine.
Okay, great. Okay, sounds good. So, so I don't know if you have other things to talk about beyond the number and the members of the subcommittee, but also whether or not you would communicate by way of a written summary and or oral report
I
to the
think
ELC.
that'll all come out because you have my goals, you have my objectives. So
Yeah.
the next is to move forward with what do the activities look like with timelines. And that would be a part of our discussions.
Very good. Thank you so much, Commissioner Arnold. I appreciate you giving this thought. And we'll look forward to hearing back from you at our next meeting, okay?
Okay.
All right. We also have discussed on item number 5B3, the augmentation of staff resources for historic preservation work in planning, building, and code enforcement department. And I want to offer an opportunity to speak to our historic preservation officer and Robert Manford, if they have any words that they would like to add, to get us a fair idea of what the need is in the department. We saw this month a number of properties that were added now to the HRI. And other months we have lots of projects to assess and evaluate and so forth. So it seems like the department is always, you know, has a lot of work to handle. And so I appreciate the work that's done. And then I would add one other thing, which is, and Vice Chair Rainsford, you are the one that brought this up, is the code enforcement officers seem to have, you know, a need for more, for augmentation. Is that a fair statement, Vice Chair Rainsford? We need to add more code enforcement officers for historic preservation?
I don't really have enough knowledge, I guess, of the how it functions to make any kind of statement. Well, I think what I was suggesting rather is that the existing code enforcement system might actually be sufficient if the correct language were simply introduced to allow code enforcement to enforce certain provisions.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know that answer unless someone inside City Hall would have to answer that question, I think.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Ms. Peak Edwards, do you have any thoughts on this that you'd like us to consider?
I don't at the moment. I think we're trying to get our own handle on it. We, you know, have requests into City Council in terms of the budget. I'm trying to utilize newly hired staff where there's no supervisors at the moment, so that we can have them work on things until, you know, they get ramped up for their own project. To start with, identifying historic reports and documentation that were previously done through development projects, and just trying to find the best way to do that. It's hard to find information in our system. It's a kind of laborious process. So we're starting there so that we can identify what we already have in terms of documentation and what needs to be, where the resources need to be put to identify new things.
So my question is, as a follow-up to that, is if you're helping and or kind of training, if you will, or orienting people to, you know, assist you in your tasks, and these people are not currently being assigned to supervisors, is it true that they would then move on to another department or another job description at some point, and then you'd have to retrain someone else?
Yeah, no, I'm not training anyone for historic preservation. I'm just trying to utilize existing hours. We have one new staff member on the citywide team that doesn't have a direct supervisor yet. So I'm just utilizing her time while she has time
Okay,
until her projects come into play.
so there's minimal or no time involved for you to, orient her to what the task is and what's involved.
Oh, she's starting the task, but this is a project specific task that's on a as time is available to her basis.
Okay,
So there's not really any training per se. It's really just, research.
I see. Okay, thank you for your explanation there. Robert Manfred, do you have anything you'd like to share at this point before we have more discussion?
Yes, in addition to what Dana indicated, just wanted you to know that the city's executive management is aware that we need to resource our HP program. So we've put in a request through the budget process for that to be addressed. And the long-term goal is also, as Dana said, but with a little twist, the long-term goal is to actually train and equip planners to do some minimal work with regards to historic resources, so that it's only the complex issues that will go to Dana's shop. So we're working on it.
So there is a request already made for additional staff. That's excellent.
That's correct.
I'm
That's
so glad
correct.
to hear that.
Yeah. As it stands, just like you were asking, Commissioner Nestle was asking why we need to put all these in the historic resources inventory. Actually, that is the job and requirement of the HPO. But in as much as she is doing that, there is also the demand from the development review standpoint, where she has to kind of divide her time between the citywide workload in terms of getting the historic resources inventory and all the surveys, as well as doing, to some extent, the CEQA related work and historic preservation component of development review. So it's a twofold work, and we're trying to get some additional resources through the budget process.
Mr. Manfredi, would this additional request for staff be of the same range in pay as HPO? Or is it,
no, they will report to the HPO. The
so
HPO.
it'll be a subordinate?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
If
Just one position, is that correct?
So far, yes.
Okay.
But we are also in the process of training staff to do some minimal historic preservation.
Okay. Thank you for your information. I'd like to open it up to commissioners. We had talked, I believe, last month about possibly recommending a consultant. And so I did follow up a little bit with Ms. Peak Edwards about consultants, and so that is one step in the right direction, at least, that we get some help for her. But at the same time, we know that with this news, at least it's news to me from Mr. Manfred, that a request has been made. Maybe that's, I don't know. What are your thoughts here? I will start with Commissioner Royer. Do you have any thoughts on augmenting staff resources?
I think it's great that there's already been a request to get additional staff for the preservation program. And I think it may be wise to just see how that shakes out before we start trying to bring on consultants for additional work that may be covered by the staff member.
Okay.
And see what that staff member's responsibilities will be, and then see how we further need to augment that with potential consultants.
Thank you, Commissioner Royer. I see a hand raised by Mr. Manfred. Do you have any comment to that?
Yes, I just wanted to somehow address Commissioner Royer's concern. If we go the route of consultants, they still have to be paid. And the planning division, we operate on a cost recovery basis. So as development proposals come in and they pay the application, that's really what pays us. So it's a very difficult situation to try to get additional funds if we are not able to get billable hours, or also kind of somehow recover the costs with regards to
Commissioner-
staff time.
Commissioner Royer, I understood your comment is to support what was being done. Is that correct? That you-
Yes, I think it would be a better solution to get an additional staff member rather than bringing consultants on to do the work. So, and, get additional staff trained and permanently there in the department to address preservation concerns. I think that's a better solution than having to find consultants on an as-needed basis to deal with preservation issues.
Mr. Manford, do you, would it be a benefit in terms of the staff and or city council to have a statement on behalf of the HLC supporting the request?
Definitely, I believe the HLC can.
Make a statement.
Yes, Renee could opine on it, but the HLC can definitely recommend or support any work that we do.
All right. Commissioner Nessel, do you have any questions or comments about this?
No, I think that's fine, the path that we're on. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Arnold?
I too concur that if there's an opportunity to have permanent staff who understand the culture, what we're doing, let's do that versus beginning with consultants. I just always feel that it's a much better path to have permanent folks that understand what we're doing and the importance of our work. So I concur.
Thank you. Vice Chair Rainsford?
Yeah, I concur with both previous comments and I have nothing further to add.
And I too concur. So let me entertain a motion if it is a motion. I'm not certain that we need to make a motion, but at least make a statement that we can all endorse. Let me ask City Attorney Ortega, do we move or do we simply make a statement and vote upon it?
I mean, I think this is sufficient, the comments you made now.
Okay.
So those will be recorded in the minutes.
So it is a unanimous statement of support for Mr. Manford's request for staff. All right, we can move forward then. Our next item on the agenda is 5C, Grace Baptist Church, which is located at 484 East San Fernando Street and 110 South 10th Street. It's on the corner. And the staff recommendation is to defer any action and to change the historic resources inventory classification of Grace Baptist Church. So let me ask Historic Preservation Officer Peak Edwards if there's any, if she has anything that she would like to add on this.
Thank you, Chair Boehm. Since the last HLC meeting, staff was able to locate the DPR 523 series forms that were prepared for the property in 2002 by Architectural Resources Group as part of a city survey effort that's attached to the agenda. The property was not formally evaluated against the criteria for listing in the National Register, California Register, or Historic Resource Inventory as a candidate city landmark, and needs to be updated and reevaluated since the property was recorded 20 years ago. So staff recommends not taking any action on listing the property in the Historic Resources Inventory as a candidate landmark until the DPR forms are updated by a qualified historic resources consultant and the property is formally evaluated against the city landmark designation criteria, and the documentation and evaluation are received and reviewed for completeness by the Planning Division.
Okay, thank you, Historic Preservation Officer Peak Edwards. Now we're going to go through, if you have any questions, you can ask, or then we'll go through and ask for public comment. Let me ask Commissioner Royer, do you have any questions regarding this property, Grace Baptist Church?
Yeah, I do. So while this is being reevaluated, it's still listed on the inventory, so would still be flagged if there were any kind of development proposal. And so no demolition permits could be issued while this process is going on. Is that right?
When an application comes in for development, it will be evaluated through the SEQA process at that time.
Okay, and has there been somebody identified to update the DPR form at this point?
At the last HLC meeting, members of the church, select members of the church had indicated that they were in the process of preparing DPR forms. We now have this new information from 2002 available that can be used. They can submit the information, and if we need to get a peer review or other information, then we can do that internally.
Okay, so it's already ongoing. Great, thank you.
Okay, thank
And
you.
also, we would like to avoid double work, since we've heard that applications might come in. When the application comes in, it will trigger all the necessary requirements for studies and whatever needs to be done.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Manford. I see a hand raised. Commissioner Arnold, do you have a question?
I would just like, actually, I'm going to go back to our last meeting, and I did not complete a conflict. I don't know if we're voting tonight. I did not complete, okay. Dana says we're not voting tonight. I just wanted to make sure, Renee, that I'm deferring any comments or what have you, because I have a conflict of interest with this church.
Thank you very
Okay.
much. Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Nessel, do you have a question?
Well, last month, when this topic came up, I was kind of confused because there was a group who was expressing great allegiance and homage to this church and all the great things that they had done. And then there was a speaker that came up and said the exact opposite. And I wasn't quite sure what was being asked of us. Because do we, what was being asked of us? So I'm very glad that we're doing this process and going through the DPR form. And when they come back, it should be phrased in some way that we know what it is being asked. And that's really my comment. I was a little bit confused. I'm glad we deferred all the discussion because I wasn't sure what we were being asked to do.
Just to clarify, the question that they were posing is, would it be possible to reclassify the property in the inventory as a candidate city landmark? It's currently listed in the inventory as a structure of merit as indicated in the DPR form that's attached to the agenda. Now, we wouldn't do that unless it had been evaluated and determined to meet the criteria for candidate city landmark. This is the reason why the properties that were just added to the inventory this evening are being classified as identified structures, because we don't know what their status will be. So we can't change a classification until we have the documentation to do that.
Okay. Okay, let me ask Vice Chair Rainsford, and then I have a question. Vice Chair Rainsford. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Nessel, did you have any other questions?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Rainsford, do you have any questions?
I do. My recollection is that the testimony that was brought forward last month, and I understand that there are two opposing opinions within the congregation, but the group that is interested in preservation actually brought interesting facts to bear, which contradict the DPR, right? So I think that one thing is I believe that they mentioned the name of the architect. Here the DPR says unknown, right? So I think there are a lot of things that we need to actually get to some of the facts, fact finding about this. And I also, when I'm looking through this document too, it looks as though it was first I guess, described in 1978, right? And then updated in 2002. Is that correct? I'm just, because I look at these two dates on the document.
I don't know about the history. I think the deficiency with the DPR form is that, you know, clearly it doesn't go through each individual evaluation criteria for any of the
Correct, yeah.
categories. So we don't know. We know there's lots of history that's been discussed, but it is not documented in terms of primary and secondary sources. And so we just don't have that information. Plus, it's 2022 now and not 2002, and we have a totally different perspective than we did 20 years ago. So it needs to be updated. But again, we don't reclassify things until we have that archival documentation and evaluation. But I don't know what beyond it just probably being some sort of architectural city survey that was done 20 years ago. There was the downtown survey, the East Frame survey. It was probably, one of those. I don't know what the reference to 1978, maybe it was identified earlier, but a lot of documentation, well, a lot of flagging that we have doesn't have any information with it. It has just been a flag for a long time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of just contradictory information in it. So, the fact at one point it says that the surrounding district is very historic, like there's an important context. Another part of it seems to indicate, no, there is no important context. So we'd want some more information about, okay, what are the adjacencies actually? I know that it's fairly close to the Negley Park Conservation Area. It's not directly in it. There are a number of very important landmark buildings actually nearby. So there, I think this is certainly, a building that needs a lot more investigation. So that's my only comment.
Okay, thank you very much.
I agree 100%. I mean, a lot of what was really talked about was the organ and how historic that is and what the need to preserve that. And that sounds very worthwhile, but from a structural standpoint and the neighborhood mission of the church, I heard a lot about that and how that needed to be preserved. But I don't think that's really what we do.
Well, if I could just say, I think that they did actually talk about an architect.
Yes,
and they also talked about a minister who had been there a long time that they said was a significant individual. So we need to investigate the architect and who this individual is and whether or not he's significant.
And all of that is going to be done when they do the DPR form.
Right, it's got to be done properly and by the right people in the right way.
Right. Okay. Commissioner Arnold, do you have your hand up or?
I just have a comment that because this is kind of where I kind of live, churches are unique institutions and they don't necessarily have a committee, or we're very fortunate with the committee and chairs and archives that you can touch and feel. And so oftentimes it's the pastor, then he dies or she leaves and there goes the history. So it's going to be interesting to see the result of the documentation and the work that they do on the DPR, because there's a lot of movement in churches. And you don't have a single individual that you can point to over a period of, you're lucky if you get 2 decades of documents. And so I think that's what, I heard the same thing that Vice Chair Rainsford heard. I heard about this architect. And I thought I was going to hear more, but we didn't. And I think that they are in what I would call information gathering and going into attics and going into basements and cellars with different members of the church. It's just a very unique institution. That's the best way to put it. And I've talked to several church historians in the downtown, and this is the story.
Yeah.
Just a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Arnold. And I too am a member of a church, and I will just say that this is to reinforce what Commissioner Arnold just said. It's complicated. We have a board of trustees, we have a church council, we have staff parish relations committee. Who is going to be the person on record as making a decision, quote unquote, the owners of the church? Would it be the entire church making a vote? I don't know. I think they had a vote, if I recall. And so, but in any case, those are items that we will, I think, defer as being stated. My other question, Historic Preservation Officer Peak Edwards, do we have an estimated date for the completion of the DPR forms?
Well, it would come from the community, and if it doesn't come from the community, it would be initiated during any development application process and the CEQA review. So either way, it's going to be done.
Yeah, so though, but that my question is when, and you're saying it may not be initiated until a public makes a request.
Well, they indicated at the last meeting that they were working on preparing DPR forms.
Oh, okay.
That was the statement that was made.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, with that in mind, there's nothing that we have to take action upon. We're going to be deferring this action until the following things got done. The DPR 523 forms are completed and it's formally evaluated for criteria outlined in municipal code, and that the documentation and evaluation are received and reviewed for completeness by the Planning Commission. Right, I think we can go on to our next item on the agenda. Item 6, referrals from city council, boards, commissions, and other agencies. No items. Our next item is open forum. Item 7, members of the public are invited to speak on any item that does not appear on today's agenda and is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission. Commission cannot engage in any substantive discussion or take any formal action in response to the public comment. The commission can only ask questions or respond to statements to the extent necessary to determine whether to refer the matter or staff for follow-up, or request staff to report back on a matter at a subsequent meeting, or direct staff to place the item on a future agenda. Right, I see a hand raised. I'm asking Yen if you will call out the name of the person from the public.
Mike, you are unmuted.
Hi, this is Mike Sodergren. Commissioner, Chair, you didn't ask for public comment on 5B and C. Was that not available tonight?
I'm sorry, it was not my intention to it's an oversight. I'm so sorry. Could you make that comment now and we'll consider it?
Yes, I would like to do that. And would that preclude making an open forum comment?
Yes, we would give you that opportunity to make an open forum.
Yeah, I'll make this short and sweet. Mike Sodergren, Preservation Action Council. Back on 5B, first of all, thank you, commissioners, for the work that you're doing in committee on financial incentives and recognition of cultural diversity, issues. Clearly, this is an area that I think calls for a test case, or 2 or 3. Where we actually just take a project. We're working on a project right now. The HPO is working with us on a project to save a historic property that's been blighted, has got all sorts of problems. And we have chosen to work with the developer in a supportive role in helping them to get through that. We had a work day this last week, where we cleared the property, did some painting, did all sorts of stuff to try to secure the property and stabilize it. But, it seems to me that we need a guidebook. We need something that includes, sort of in short, all the obligations and all the incentives that are associated with touching and owning a historic property. Clearly when somebody buys a property that was built in 1868, they can see it's historic, right? They don't really need to be told They don't really need to look at a register to see that. They don't need to look at an HRI. What they do need to know, and they don't know, is what incentives are there. Most of the people that we talk to have no idea about the Mills Act. They have no idea from a zoning standpoint what changes can be made to save a property and integrate it into a new project. And they don't know what the obligations under CEQA are. So it would be good if we could put that together. That's my comment on the financial incentives and recognition of cultural diversity.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate your comment and suggestion that a guidebook be written if one does not exist for the purpose of historic property ownership and all the benefits and obligations therein. Thank you for that. I think it's an excellent idea. And now, if you'd like to ask, if you'd like to express an opinion for open forum, we would invite you to do that at this time. I see another hand up. Yen, do you want to call the next person?
Yes, John Froley, you are unmuted.
Hi, John Froley. I'm a preservation architect, and I'm also a PAC SJ member, and been working with Mike on this same project. And I do want to thank you for taking on these staff recommendation issues that you're working on. I think they're very, very important to San Jose. And I also wanted to piggyback onto Mike's comments about the guidebook. It was occurring to me that since I work in the building realm and I'm often looking up things to instruct my clients, San Jose uses a thing called bulletins, and they will often do a San Jose bulletin, and it'll be a simple 2-page or 3-page cut sheet that gives guidelines to people, and it would easily be transferable to that sort of, the same concept that Mike was talking about could be easily transferable to that format in some type of informative bulletin that would give the owners some guidelines, that they are to keep their specifically the demolition by neglect topic, and then how to safeguard their buildings, security systems, things like that they have to keep a roof on the building, that sort of thing. And so distilling these down to something that's digestible, I think would be helpful. Could also be given to real estate agents so that when they're dealing with landmark buildings, they could make it part of their disclosure. I think that's a very critical factor that needs to be put out there. And then we've talked in the past about holding developers to having a bond or some kind of insurance policy that would be put down when they engage in a project, so that they have some skin in the game. And if something tragic happens to the house, they basically know they're covering it. So those are my comments. Just want to pass those on. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I don't know if this is something that just occurred to me, and I just wanted to ask Commissioner Royer if in Wilmington you knew of any kind of guidebook that existed for historic owners, historic property owners.
I don't recall if there was a guidebook, but I know there were workshops that were put on by the State Historic Preservation Office that were targeted toward homeowners, just different topics. It wasn't a comprehensive guidebook, but their website had resources, and there were occasional workshops on specific topics associated with preserving residential properties. Specifically, there may have been some for small businesses as well.
Thank you. Is there any kind of resource that you can think of? I shouldn't put you on the spot like this, but at any time, Historic Preservation Officer Dana, if you have a resource, please, let us know what that might be. If not, it's just something that you might want to consider at some point.
It's clear the website needs to be updated and we need bulletins, and that's a major work item on the program for the year.
Okay. All right, thank you. Our next speaker for open forum, Yen, do you want to call Ben Leach?
Thank you. I just have two quick comments for just general information. One, a lot of what we've been talking about tonight are great ideas that really require political support. As we know, the city council is in control of the purse strings of a lot of things that we would like to see happen on staff. PAC-SJ has distributed a candidate survey, went out to 30 people who are running for citywide office, and just would encourage you, if you are interested, to go to preservation.org and read what all of the candidates who are currently running for mayor and city council have to say about preservation. We obviously are a nonprofit that does not endorse candidates, but we do try to spread the word about the importance of preservation, and we are spreading the word about the candidates' views on preservation, and we would think that it is very important and encouraging that a lot of the candidates that are running have very specific views about what should be funded by the city, and we encourage you to review those for your own information. The other note, we were just made aware that the Cesar Chavez house on Scharf Avenue, which is a city landmark, is currently for sale. We are doing some research, and Dana Peak had identified the original nomination form that identified the site being designated, but not the structures themselves. This was done in 1993, and we're thinking that the thought was these were very modest buildings, and they didn't look like historic buildings, not high style architecture. So it was just the site. I would hope that we could get more clarification on what the commission's purview would be if there were a development proposal on that site.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leach. Appreciate that comment. Our next speaker is Mike. Yen, do you want to indicate when he can begin speaking?
Mike, you're unmuted.
Mike Sodergren, just in case it wasn't clear because of the cutoff, Cesar Chavez is such a significant individual. It's really difficult to tell the story, via a plaque in the ground that somebody can't see, no matter how humble the house might be, no matter how insignificant it might be architecturally, the significance is who lived there. Anyway, the other comment that I wanted to make, Ben started off, which was the candidate survey. And it was really just sort of fun to see that we had chosen to reach out to the two county supervisors' offices that were the candidates running for that, the mayor of San Jose and the odd numbered city council districts. But we got a call from one of the candidates running for county assessor saying, hey, historic preservationists, you should ask us our opinion too. And I was kind of set back because I just didn't even think of it. And the gentleman said, hey, we handle the Mills Act. And so I thought, wow, we really need to get that out to him. So we have, and we hope that we'll be able to put that forward shortly as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sodergren. Our next item, if there are no other public waiting to speak, I don't see any. So our next item is number 8 on the agenda, good and welfare. And our first item is A, report from the Secretary, Planning Commission, and City Council. The first item is future agenda items. There are no items. So the next item is 2, summary of communications received by the Historic Landmarks Commission.
We don't have any written communication, but I don't know if this is where you want to make your announcement, Chair Bain.
Yeah, I would like just to make a simple announcement. The Preservation Awards Night will take place at 7 p.m. on May 21st at History Park. Tickets are available at preservation.org. They cost $15 and they are free for anybody for age 18 or under 18. When you get to preservation.org, you want to look for the SCCPA button, and that will take you to ordering tickets. And I also want to make another simple announcement, which is I went on the PAC San Jose website earlier today, and I reviewed the candidate statements, and I found them very enlightening, and I highly recommend that you check that out for historic preservation. All right. Our next item is item 3, and that is the North First Street Local Transit Village Historic Resource Survey. And that would be Historic Preservation Officer Dana Peak Edwards.
This is just a follow-up item for last month. These documents were intended to be attached to the agenda last month. So this is the, hopefully we'll answer a lot of the questions that PAC-SJ and others had about how the survey was conducted and how we ended up evaluating specific properties.
Okay, thank you. Our next item is item number 4, status on Historic Landmarks Commission vacancies. I don't know if Mr. Manford or Dana.
Yeah, I can report on that. So the mayor's office has made recommendations to the boards and commissions office for the reappointment of commissioners and the appointment of 2 new commissioners. When that process is completed, the commissioners will be introduced, and we hope, although we don't have any indication on timing yet, that possibly it will happen by the August HLC meeting.
Thank you very much. We're so happy to hear that. Thank you very much for your work on that, Dana. I appreciate it, and also Robert Manford. All right. The next item on the agenda is 8A, number 5, starting in July 1st, 2022. The Historic Landmarks Commission meetings will take place in person only for commissioners, staff, and the public.
So a point of clarification here, the public will have the ability to do hybrid. It's only staff and the commissioners that have to be in person.
I see. Thank you for the clarification. Our next item is number 8B, a report from committees. The Design Review Subcommittee had no meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, May 19th. Can you foresee that meeting happening, or is it look dubious?
It will likely be canceled. We don't have any items at the moment.
Isn't that amazing?
We were heavy on development last year, so we need to catch up.
Exactly. Item 8C is the approval of action minutes. The recommendation is to approve the action minutes for Historic Landmarks Commission meeting on April 6, 2022. Do I hear a motion?
I move that the minutes be approved.
Commissioner Arnold, I second.
Commissioner Nessel and Commissioner Arnold have moved and seconded to accept the minutes for our April 2022 HLC meeting. Let's go through and see how we vote. Commissioner Royer?
Commissioner Royer, I approve.
Okay, Commissioner Arnold?
Commissioner Arnold, I approve.
Commissioner Nessel?
Commissioner Nessel approves.
And Vice Chair Rainsford?
Vice Chair Rainsford, I approve.
And Chair Boehm, I approve. So Motion passes. We approve the minutes for action minutes for the HLC meeting on April 6, 2022. Vote is 5-0. Status of circulating environmental documents. There's a notice of availability of a draft supplemental environmental impact report, EIR, and a public comment period for the Valley Title project. And the link was posted in the agenda.
Yeah, just to note, the public comment period for Valley Title goes from April 26 and ends on June 6. We also have an additional draft EIR that was published after this agenda went out for Bowtown project. And just to note that the public comment period goes from April 29th to June 14th for that one.
Would you mind restating the public comment period for the title?
Valley Title,
Yeah,
April 22nd, ends on June 6.
okay.
And both of those draft EIRs, including the comment periods, are online on the city's website.
I don't know if we want to put that on the agenda to possibly write a letter as the HLC for either one of those properties. I think we've discussed Bowtown and that seemed to be settled. But the Valley Title project, we had concerns about. I asked if there's an interest in having that discussed at our June meeting. Any of the commissioners interested in discussing it further, or would you like to comment individually? As you can, without any consultation among the commissioners.
Well, would we actually have any new information that we hadn't seen before? No.
Dana's indicating no. Okay, what we have already stated is a part of the record, is that correct? So if I go to the website that is provided on the agenda, item 8D, I will see our input, is that correct?
I'd have to check back. I would recommend that you look because I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
So if it was brought for early referral, which I believe it was, then the feedback from the commission will be part of the notice of preparation responses.
Okay. All right. I don't hear any further comment from the commission. So with that, I will ask if there is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, a second.
Commissioner Arnold, I second.
Okay. Let me go through. Commissioner Nessel,
I approve. I second. I third.
you fourth. Commissioner Royer,
Commissioner Royer, I approve.
Commissioner Arnold,
Commissioner Arnold, I approve.
Vice Chair Rainsford,
Vice Chair Rainsford, I approve.
and Chair Boehm, I approve. And I'd like to wish all of you a very happy weekend. This is Mother's Day weekend. I hope if you celebrate, you have a very good time with your special person. Very good and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.